Now to a hearing of the Senate Banking Committee, which is considering neurosurgeon and former presidential candidate Ben Carson to be the next Housing and Urban Development Secretary. From Capitol Hill, this is about 2.5 hours.
This hearing will come to order. First thing this morning, I want to welcome the new members to the Senate Banking Committee. Senator David Perdue. Is he here yet? He's in Senate Armed Services. What's going on this morning? We'll see him in just a moment, I'm sure. Senator Tom Tillis. Welcome, Senator Tillis. Senator John Kennedy. Welcome. Senator Brian Cortez Masto. Welcome. We appreciate all of you, and I speak for all of the regular old members of the committee that we welcome you here, and we look forward to a lot of good work. Earlier members of the committee. Yeah, I was just told by both sides to speak for myself. I look forward to working with all of us on the committee, all members of Yeah, I was just told by both sides to speak for myself. I look forward to working with all of us on the committee, all members of the committee this year. And, this committee has a long and distinguished history of tackling important and complicated issues. And this Congress is no exception. In fact, we have a significant list of important issues that we will need to deal with. And we will do that, and I'm confident that we'll continue this tradition. My hope is we'll do it in a strong bipartisan manner. I particularly look forward to working with my colleague Sherrod Brown as our ranking member. Sherrod and I have had a number of meetings already on these issues that we'll be dealing with, and we'll work to lead this committee through some very important territory during this session. This morning we will hear testimony on the nomination for the Secretary of the United States Department of Housing and Urban Development. We'll begin today's hearing with an opening statement by me and the ranking member. And we will then turn to Senator Rubio, who will introduce the Secretary-designate, Dr. Benjamin Carson. And welcome Dr. Carson to the committee. We will then follow the early bird rule, meaning that members will be recognized by the chair in the order of seniority for those who were present at the time the gavel came down, and in order of arrival thereafter. Each member will be allotted 5 minutes for the number of rounds that time will permit. Dr. Benjamin Carson was raised by a single mother in an impoverished part of the city of Detroit. He attended Yale University and the University of Michigan Medical School and later became a highly accomplished and respected neurosurgeon. Dr. Carson was named Director of Pediatric Neurosurgery at Johns Hopkins Hospital in 1984 at the age of 33, the youngest such director in the nation. He gained national fame in the 1980s by becoming the first doctor to lead an operation that separated twins conjoined at the head, one of many high-profile operations led by Dr. Carson. In addition to his successful career as a surgeon, Dr. Carson is also a decorated author, a speaker who has written numerous best-selling books on a range of topics. He also ran for president in this past election and spent months traveling the country and listening to the American people about the problems and issues that they face, including with respect to housing. Throughout his career, Dr. Carson has achieved a great deal of success. He has demonstrated a fervent intensity for improving the lives of his fellow Americans, and his intellect, leadership, and life experiences are unique, valuable assets for leading an agency like HUD. Dr. Carson has said he plans to continue his conversation with the American people and do a listening tour if confirmed. This is an encouraging sign that Dr. Carson wants to hear from stakeholders and, more importantly, from the American people. I hope to work with Dr. Carson on how to reimagine housing policy at HUD. I look forward to working on streamlining requirements for local public housing authorities, especially for smaller housing authorities. One example is the Small Public Housing Authority Opportunities Act, which seeks to encourage innovative approaches to determining tenant rents and to adjust the level of federal oversight over small housing authorities. We should also look at the Section 8 Moving to Work Rental Assistance Demonstration and public housing programs where there has been interest in reform for many years. I hope to work with Dr. Carson on improvements to the programs that would produce cost savings, reduce burdens on local housing authorities, and encourage self-sufficiency. Another issue this committee has worked on are home equity conversion mortgages, which we call around here HECMs. It's important that we evaluate these important parts of our system, and I look forward to working with you on that program as well, Dr. Carson. While the low-income housing tax credit is under Finance Committee's jurisdiction, it's very important to us in the U.S. housing market. It provides essential capital to underserved communities and provides key financing for small and rural affordable housing developments. Tackling our homelessness, especially among our nation's veterans, is another issue that is important to me and other members of this committee. It is critical that HUD allow local communities to craft solutions that work best for their community needs. I hope to work with Dr. Carson and with other members of this committee on these and many other issues of critical need. At this time, I'd like to ask unanimous consent to enter into the record 17 letters and other statements that have been submitted in support of Dr. Carson's nomination. I won't at this point read all of them. I suspect throughout the hearing we may read or reference to a number of these letters, but I do want to just highlight a couple of the first few. This includes letters from Bart Harvey, the former chair and CEO of Enterprise Community Partners, and a longtime affordable housing advocate. It also includes a bipartisan letter from 4 former HUD secretaries, Henry Cisneros, former Senator Mel Martinez, Alfonso Jackson, and Stephen Preston. Without objection, so ordered. I look forward to hearing from Dr. Carson today. Before we do that, though, we're going to turn first to Senator Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for holding this hearing. Congratulations on your new role in leading this committee. I echo what Senator Crapo said about his and my relationship. We've worked together in the Finance Committee on a number of issues and known each other for many years and had 3 or 4 already productive meetings since it was clear that he was going to be the chairman of this committee. Welcome our new members, Senator Schatz, Senator Van Hollen, Senator Cortez Masto, good to see you, Senator Kennedy, Senator Tillis, and Senator Perdue. Glad that all of you are on the committee. I look forward to working with each of you. Dr. Carson, I welcome you. Mrs. Carson, it was nice to meet you today, and I have not yet met your sons, but I have not met your lovely little granddaughter. I know you have a couple other granddaughters that couldn't make it today. I want to thank you for your willingness to serve our country along with your husband and father and grandfather. As Chairman Crapo noted, Dr. Carson's a distinguished neurosurgeon. His remarkable life story is well known to all of us and to millions of Americans. He's an inspiration and a testament to the American dream. Much as we might wish otherwise, many children won't have the same combination of fortitude and a firm hand and a good fortune that allowed Dr. Carson to rise to the highest levels of medicine and the highest levels of our society. For some perspective, one study of medical students showed that only about 5% came from households with incomes under $20,000. Different research has shown that only 1 in 13 Americans will move from the lowest income quintile to the highest over a lifetime. Of course, we encourage and should encourage children and adults to follow Dr. Carson's example of getting a good education, working hard, and all that he has done. We should bear in mind, though, that many still face significant barriers to realizing that potential. For those who cannot overcome the odds on their own, should we not help them? Dr. Carson has repeatedly commented that government assistance programs are harmful. He wrote that in the wake of the civil rights movement, quote, racist people from both parties adopted a paternalistic attitude toward African Americans and enacted federal and state programs designed to take care of people who couldn't take care of themselves, people who were ignorant, stupid, or just plain lazy. Why would we do this? To again quote Dr. Carson, the only reason I can imagine that it would be a good idea for government to foster dependency in large groups of citizens is to cultivate a dependable voting bloc that will guarantee continued power as long as entitlements are provided. Dr. Carson has suggested that all assistance programs should be cut by 10% a year until the budget is balanced, without exceptions, without regard to whether the population served is vulnerable. Even social insurance programs, social insurance meaning you pay in when you need it, layoff, illness, retirement, or death. That social insurance programs like Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, which he believes are, quote, socialist leanings, even they should be subject to this 10% cut. Over 5 million Americans look to HUD for help. We're reaching only 1 of 4 eligible families. Many end up on years-long waiting lists simply because of lack of funding. They qualify, they're in the waiting list because there are not enough dollars available. A 10% cut, in addition to what to the shortages we now have, a 10% cut, or the inadequacies we have, a 10% cut would send hundreds of thousands of families into a tailspin. For some, literally it might be a matter of life and death. I should note that Dr. Carson's made clear that he thinks criticisms of his views on federal assistance are unwarranted. So today is an opportunity for him to shed more light on these seemingly contradictory views of federal assistance. I appreciated our individual time we had earlier this week to begin to explore that. We want to know more. Since 1968, HUD has been charged with ensuring that all people, regardless of race, regardless of ethnicity, or whether they have a disability, that all people have fair and equal access to housing, and that its grantees affirmatively further, that's the language, affirmatively further this policy. Here too, Dr. Carson has been critical. In one of the few statements he's made on the subject of this hearing and the subject of his new job, and one of the few statements he has made on housing policy, he called into question more than 4 decades of civil rights law. He disparaged HUD's efforts to reduce segregation as, quote, social engineering schemes designed to legislate racial equality. When Dr. Carson and I met a couple of days ago, we discussed the tragic effects of lead in my state and nationwide. Dr. Carson knows better than the rest of us, in a more scientific way, if you will, the terrible price that children in society pay for the legacy of lead in paint, industrial settings, and in water. I appreciate our conversation and look forward to hearing more about his views on HUD's role in removing lead hazards. Throughout his campaign, the president-elect promised to rebuild America's cities, which he labeled hellholes. Mr. Trump spelled out his views in this document, his, quote, New Deal for Black America, with a plan for urban renewal. The plan covers issues such as school choice, investing in law enforcement, trade, of course, tax reform, and infrastructure investment. But at a time when more than 11 million families pay more than half their income towards rent. Think of that. 11 million families spend more than half their income on rent. 500,000 people have no place to call home. The president-elect, the president-elect's plan has nothing about housing. Dr. Carson, I know you and the president-elect have talked at length about his urban renewal agenda. I'm glad we had the chance today to learn more about that agenda, the role housing will play, and how you will help to deliver on his promises to create safer communities and better infrastructure, including and especially in light of your charge, including our public housing stock. Welcome again to you, to Candy, to your family, and in front of the committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Brown. We are honored today to have Senator Marco Rubio from Florida to introduce Dr. Carson. And Senator Rubio, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to the members. Thank you to Dr. Carson for his willingness to serve our country in this role. I'm honored to be here to introduce my friend and a fellow Floridian, Dr. Ben Carson, who's President-elect Trump's nominee to be the Secretary of HUD. I'll begin by acknowledging that I didn't have a chance to interact with Dr. Carson much until about 2015 when both him and I ran for higher office, and many of those interactions were on stage in front of millions of people over 2.5 hours under hot lights, answering tough questions. I did have an interaction in the summer of 2015 in Iowa. He may not remember this, but I was feeling very sick that day, ran into him into the lobby of a hotel. Said, "I'm not feeling good today, Doc." And he said, "Well, no, tell me what you're feeling." I described my symptoms, and Dr. Carson said, "Yeah, it sounds like you're sick." So, but all that aside, I've gotten to know him and his family through this process. You learn a lot about someone by watching him in a circumstance and in a situation such as that of running for President of the United States. And, but you also learn a lot because he's clearly an extraordinary and accomplished individual, someone who has been blessed with the gift of saving lives by performing surgeries that few, if any, in the world would have undertaken. Dr. Carson is supremely accomplished in his professional life. And even though his accomplishments in his professional life are extraordinary, I believe he's even a more extraordinary person. He's a man of limitless compassion and of concern for others, a man who has never forgotten where he started out in life and all the obstacles that he had to overcome to achieve the American dream, and a man who has devoted his life in public service. He's been a mentor, a generous giver of his time, a founder of a successful nonprofit, all designed to help remove the obstacles that he faced from other Americans. As the Secretary of HUD, Dr. Carson will encounter a department that is broken in many regards. It is a vast, sprawling bureaucracy that reaches all corners of our country. It's based here in Washington, but its most important work doesn't even take place here. It takes place out in the communities where they have housing facilities or provide assistance to people. I've seen with my own eyes the major challenges HUD faces and of its consequences on real people. Specifically, I've seen how lapses, incompetence, and a lack of accountability in the HUD inspection process has endangered the lives of men, women, and children, and not just in Florida, but all across this country. HUD needs a leader who knows how to overcome tough obstacles, someone who, when told you'll never be able to do that, finds the way to do that and does it well. Well, that is what Ben Carson has done his entire life. To those who may have questions about his qualifications, that is certainly the role of this committee. But I would argue to you that the most important qualification that I would look for in a HUD secretary is someone that understands that HUD is not just about providing people a place to live. At its core, HUD is about the American dream. HUD is about the belief that those who have been left behind and have suffered and have fallen down, we need to give them a chance to stand back up on their own 2 feet and achieve a better life. HUD, in many ways, is about empowering people to capture the promise of America, the one thing that makes us different than the rest of the world, where in this country, no matter who you're born to or how underprivileged you may be starting out in life, we believe every human being is entitled by our Creator to achieve their God-given potential. And I would just encourage this committee to understand this. Dr. Carson believes this not because he read about it in a book or in a magazine or because he watched some documentary on PBS. He believes it because he has lived it, and that cannot be easily replicated. He has the values, the compassion, and the character, and the kind of drive that we need. He's a proven leader, a doer in solving tough problems and doing things that are hard and that people believe to be impossible. Throughout his life, people have put their hopes and literally their lives in his hands. And from everything I've seen from him firsthand and gotten to know about him, I am hopeful that this nation will soon entrust him with the duty of serving as the Secretary of HUD. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Rubio, and you're certainly welcome to stay, but I know you've got other responsibilities to attend to. We appreciate you taking your time to come and introduce Dr. Carson. Dr. Carson, before we turn the floor over to you, it is necessary that I place you under oath. Would you please stand and raise your right hand? Do you swear or affirm that the testimony that you are about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Do you agree to appear and testify before any duly constituted committee of the Senate?
I do.
You may sit down. Dr. Carson, your written statement will be made a part of the record in its entirety, and you may now make your oral statement as you choose. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Chairman.
May I interrupt you before you get started? I should have said I encourage you to introduce your family. I think you were about to do that anyway, but
Yes.
You are certainly welcome to please introduce your family who have come to be with you.
Yes. Well, thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, Senator Brown. Thanks to Senator Rubio for that kind introduction. Thank you for members of the committee, virtually all of whom I've met with, have been very gracious, and I very much appreciate that. Thanks also to President-elect Trump for his friendship, leadership, and for his trust for such an important role. I would like to introduce my family. Directly behind me is my wife, Candy, of 41 years, my college sweetheart. And starting from this end, my oldest son, Murray, another Yalie, who is an engineer, and his wife, Lerone, who is a youth pastor, and my daughter-in-law, Merlin, who is a physician and a businesswoman, and my granddaughter, Tesora, who is just a sweetie, and my middle son, Ben Jr., or BJ as we affectionately call him, a very successful entrepreneur businessman, and our good friend, Marcia Jackson, wife of former Secretary Alfonso Jackson. And I think you probably know the others here. But Royce is, oh, there he is. Okay. My youngest son, Royce, and his father-in-law, Alexander Chapo. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and we welcome you all to the committee today. Dr. Carson, you may proceed.
You know, as a youngster, I remember actually feeling that I was pretty lucky. We lived in a 750-square-foot GI home in southwest Detroit. It actually had a lawn and a little one-car garage, and we thought that was paradise. And then my parents got divorced, and you know, my mother discovered that my father was married to someone else. And she didn't have any skills, basically third-grade education. We had no place to live. She couldn't afford the house. So we ended up moving to Boston, moving in with relatives. So I have actually, in my life, understood what housing insecurity was. And we were there in Boston for a couple of years. And I remember as a 9-year-old looking through a building across the street out of which all the windows had been broken, and a sunbeam was shining through it. And it made me think about my future. I remember thinking that I probably would never live to be 25, because that's what I saw around me. But my mother had very different ideals. You know, she worked extraordinarily hard as a domestic, leaving the house at 5 in the morning, getting back at midnight, day after day after day. And her strong desire was not to be dependent on anybody else. And people were always criticizing her, and they said, you have 2 boys, you can be on 8 dependent children. And she said, no, I can't. And she worked very hard. She would sometimes take us to the homes that she cleaned. And many of them were fabulous homes. And she would say, would you rather live in this wonderful place, or would you rather live where we live? And she would say, you know, the person who has the most to do with determining where you live is you. It's not somebody else. It's not the environment. You know, that made a very strong impression on me. And she insisted later on, when we were able to return to Detroit, still not to our idyllic home. We still couldn't afford to live there, still in a multifamily, dilapidated place with rats and roaches. But nevertheless, she was independent. And we still had that dream of being able to get back there. But I was a terrible student, and she insisted that I read. And she insisted that my brother read. We weren't very enthusiastic about that, but back in those days, you had to do what your parents told you. And as I started reading, I began to discover a whole new world. We were desperately poor, but between the covers of those books, I could go anywhere, I could be anybody, I could do anything. And within the space of a year and a half, I went from the bottom of the class to the top of the class. much to the consternation of all those students who used to call me dummy. They were now coming to me saying, Benny, how do you work this problem? And I'd say, sit at my feet, youngster, while I instruct you. I was perhaps a little obnoxious, but it sure felt good to say that to those turkeys. But, you know, I had a very different impression of who I was at that point. And, you know, it's one of the reasons that Candy and I started the Carson Scholars Fund, a component of which are reading rooms. And we put in reading rooms all over the country. We have 165 of them now, primarily in Title I schools where kids come from homes with no books. They go to a school with no library or poorly funded library. They're not likely to become readers. As you know, 70 to 80% of high school dropouts are functionally illiterate. And if we can truncate that downstream, you can change the trajectory of their lives. And that's really what it's about, changing lives and providing opportunities for people. It makes all the difference in the world. You know, we had a program at Hopkins, and I would have 700 to 800 students at a time come in on a regular basis. If you came to Johns Hopkins, some of you probably have, and you saw all the school buses around. That was bringing in the kids and trying to encourage them in terms of what they could do. And I got involved in a lot of the programs in Baltimore with the East Baltimore Community Development, Inc., and with the community school, and with all the schools and the mayors. And, you know, that was a very important part of my life, even though I was an extraordinarily busy surgeon. And I do believe that government can play a very important role. I know some have distorted what I've said about government, but I believe government is important. And it is there, I believe, to promote life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. What has happened too often is that people who seemingly mean well have promoted things that do not encourage the development of innate talent in people. And hence we have generation after generation of people living in dependent situations. It's not that they're bad people. It's that this is what they've been given. This is all they know in many cases. I think we have an opportunity here to do something about that. If we take a more holistic approach. When we talk about HUD traditionally, most people think putting houses over putting roofs over the heads of poor people. But it has the ability to be so much more than that, particularly if we take a holistic approach. And we think about how do we develop our fellow human beings. I see each individual as human capital that can be developed to become part of the engine that drives our nation, or if not developed, becomes part of the load. And we are the ones who are tasked with helping to make the difference. So I do believe that government is extraordinarily important. And one of the things that I want to do, instead of just listening to the sage people of Washington, D.C., and there are some wise people here, I want to go on a listening tour. I want to hear from the people with boots on the ground who are actually administering programs, who are benefiting from the programs. I want to see what actually works and what does not work. I want to analyze why it works and why it doesn't work. Before I go on the road to do that, I want to do that at HUD. We have people there who've been there for 10, 20, 30, even 40 years. And I don't think a lot of people listen to what they have to say. I suspect that they have garnered a tremendous amount of information. And I want to get that information from them. I want to work with them on a regular basis. Some people say, but medicine, why would you go into something like HUD? Well, I actually believe that there's a tremendous nexus, a great intersection, because good health has a lot to do with a good environment. And after working so hard on so many people and then putting them back into an environment with lead and with all kinds of inducements for asthma and other chronic diseases, that's not very, very helpful. And I'm looking forward to, the Safe and Healthy Homes program at HUD and enhancing that program very significantly. And why is all of this so important? Well, there was a Brookings study, a very important study, which showed that if people did 3 things, their likelihood of living in poverty would be 2% or less. And that's really what we want to do, keep people from living in poverty. Those 3 things were graduate from high school, get a job, and wait until you're married to have children. Think about that. And, what that means is that there are points of intervention, things that we can do to make a difference in people's lives. Also, think about this fact. In terms of our human capital that's being wasted, we have 5% of the world's population and 25% of the prison inmates. That means there's something wrong. We have high recidivism rates. We have people who go into prison with little education and little in the way of skills, and they come out with little education and little in the way of skills. So what are they going to do? They go back to doing what they were doing before, hence we have these high recidivism rates. We need to think about how do we give them education? How do we give them skills? How do we cultivate the innate talent that is in those individuals so that they become part of the engine once again? And recognize we only have 330 million people. Now, it sounds like a lot of people, but that's a quarter of the people they have in India or China. We're going to have to compete with those nations into the future, which means we have to develop all of our talent. Now you say, well, that all sounds great and wonderful, but you were a pediatric neurosurgeon. How could you have anything wonderful to say about any of these things? Well, I have to chuckle when I hear people say things like that because there's an assumption that you can only do one thing and that we have these very limited brains and they're incapable of learning anything else. I find that kind of humorous, particularly knowing what the human brain is capable of. Billions of neurons, hundreds of billions of interconnections can process more than 2 million bits of information in 1 second. Any brain can do that. You can't overload it. You hear some people say you overload your brain. You can't do it. If you learned one new fact every second, it would take you more than 3 million years to challenge the capacity of your brain. So we do have the ability to learn. More importantly, we have the ability to work together. And that is absolutely critical. We in America, Democrats, Republicans, Independents, we are not each other's enemies. We must come to that understanding. There are real people out there who really want to destroy us, but we don't need to be doing that ourselves. We need to be combining our collective intellect. And one of the things that I learned in my private life as a board member at Kellogg for 18 years and Costco for 16 years is how to select a good CEO. And I'll tell you, a good CEO doesn't necessarily know everything about the business. He's not a marketing specialist. He may not be a financial specialist. There are many things that he doesn't know, but he knows how to pick those people and how to use them. And that is one of the marks of good leadership. So in closing, I've been very fortunate to be able to move from the bottom rung of the socioeconomic level to the top rung, and to understand how people feel in all those different levels. And I got to tell you, we're all in the same boat. And if part of the boat sinks, the rest of it is going down too. And it means what we need to do is exercise true compassion. True compassion is not keeping people in a situation where we can feel good about what we're doing. True compassion is putting them in a situation where they can feel good about where they're going. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Carson. We'll now go to 5-minute increments for members of the committee to question and discuss issues with you. And I encourage both you and the members to keep an eye on the clock. If we start running over a little, you'll hear me tap the gavel a little to remind you that it's time to wrap up so that we can all have a fair opportunity for our participation. I will begin first, and then we'll turn to Senator Brown. Dr. Carson, as I mentioned in my opening statement, we've received a letter of support from Bart Harvey, who is the former chair and CEO of Enterprise Community Partners. Mr. Harvey praised the charitable work that you have done to help send disadvantaged students to college. He wrote, "Although we come from opposite sides of the political spectrum, Ben and I share a common belief in helping people move up and out of poverty. He has done that through his outreach to the community and his philanthropy, and I have done it through my work with Enterprise." He further wrote, "I can vouch for his character, his heart, and his drive to help others. Given HUD's role in the fight against poverty and for increased opportunity, I believe he can bring these issues to the national attention that they deserve." Dr. Carson, how will your experiences working with the surrounding community at Johns Hopkins and through the Carson Scholars Help Fund help you run the Department of Housing and Urban Development?
Well, having had an opportunity to interact with a lot of people in Baltimore, and particularly in East Baltimore, which many of you know is not necessarily a very affluent area, and that's putting it mildly, and understanding a lot of their housing needs, because many of my patients came out of that environment. An environment where I saw children with pica, with lead poisoning chronically, and what that did to them intellectually, what it did to them medically. Saw so many children with asthma, which is induced in most of those cases by environmental influences. And recognizing that if we can give those people hope, then they can move out of that situation. But giving them hope starts with giving them a safe and a productive environment. And understanding that and understanding how you create those environments is something that I think is going to make a very big difference. And that's one of the reasons that I have already looked at some of the places in Baltimore and talked to the housing commissioner here in Washington, D.C., and talked to a commissioner in Atlanta earlier this week, and I've talked to multiple mayors, and they've given me their take, but they've also invited me to come and look at the places where they are, both the good and the bad. Those are things that I intend to do, not only early on, but continually throughout the process, because I believe there's a constant learning process. And my goal is to get everybody into a decent position, 100% of Americans.
Thank you. And Dr. Carson, I know that you've heard some criticism of your alleged positions with regard to public assistance to the poor. You've heard some today. I'd like to ask you if you would, in your words, like to discuss with us what your view is of how we should approach public assistance to the poor.
I believe that we in America are compassionate. We have a history of being compassionate to people. And we obviously don't have to do something, but that wouldn't be American. That wouldn't be who we are. Of course, I feel very strongly that we should do everything we can, not only because we're compassionate, but also because we're smart, because we recognize that for every one of our people that we do not develop, it's someone whose talent is not contributing to the moving forward of this nation. And if we're going to be successful in the future, as I mentioned before, we have to develop all of our talent. So for people to imply that I don't understand that or don't want to do anything for poor people, I believe that they perhaps are only looking at words that have been skewed and not at actions.
Thank you. And we just have about 30 seconds left, so I'll ask you very quickly. You've been nominated to run the Department of Housing and Urban Development. I think everyone on the committee is familiar with your impressive life story. In your opening statement, you mentioned that you want to help run HUD to help heal America's divisiveness. Can you just elaborate on that very briefly?
Yes. One of the things that has alarmed me is the fact that You know, we are divided on the basis of income, race, gender, religion, age, just about everything. And we continue to allow the purveyors of division, you know, to drive those wedges between us. I believe that HUD is particularly well positioned to bring some healing in this area by truly manifesting fairness toward people, by truly getting people involved with each other. You know, I want to work to bring mentorship programs. We have a lot of very successful people who can mentor young people who are in more desperate situations and show them a different way. We have public-private partnerships, which are win-win situations. Those are the kinds of things that are extraordinarily helpful. There are some who will always say to the government, give us more money, we need more money for this program and that program. Yes, it would be wonderful if there was an unlimited pot of money, but the place where there is a lot of money is in the private sector. And what we have to concentrate on is helping the private sector to recognize that in the long run, the private sector does better when we develop all of our people.
Thank you very much. Senator Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to begin by asking Nancy consent to enter in the record letters that I've received, and our staffs can work together to make sure we're not duplicating that. You see, if you would.
Without objection.
Thank you. And I also wanted to announce, and I neglected my opening statement, that Senators Reed from Rhode Island and Warner from Virginia both have responsibilities as ranking members on armed services and intelligence to do hearings on confirmation hearings today, and could not join us, but wanted to be here. So I wanted to say that. Thank you for your statements. I appreciate many of the ideas and goals you expressed. Some, however, as you, I think, know by now, are inconsistent with statements you've made over the past few years. If confirmed, I think you understand you'll be held to the ideas you've expressed today, not ones necessarily you may have written or talked about in a presidential race. You testified that you want to make communities more inclusive. This seems at odds with one of the only housing policies that prior to this nomination that you have taken a public stand on, fair housing. As I mentioned, your 2015 column in the Washington Times critiqued HUD's then new rule to affirmatively further fair housing. You characterized that rule as a government-engineered attempt to legislate racial equality. You likened it to a failed socialist experiment. Please elaborate for this committee on your view of HUD's role implementing the Fair Housing Act, especially including the requirement that HUD's grantees affirmatively further fair housing.
Well, thank you, Senator Brown, for that question and an opportunity to actually explain that, because it has been distorted by many people. As you probably know, that act says that we want people who are receiving HUD grants to look around and see if they find anything that looks like discrimination. And then we want them to come up with a solution on how to solve the problem. They're not responding to people saying that there's a problem. They're saying, go and look for a problem and then give us a solution. And what I believe to be the case is we have people sitting around desks in Washington, D.C., deciding on how things should be done. You know, telling mayors and commissioners and people, you need to build this place right here, and you need to put these kind of people in it. What I would encourage, I don't have any problem whatsoever with affirmative action or at least, you know, integration. I have no problem with that at all. But I do have a problem with people on high dictating it when they don't know anything about what's going on in the area. We have local HUD officials, and we have people who can assess what the problems are in their area, and working with local officials can come up with much better solutions than a one-size-fits-all cookie-cutter program from people in Washington, D.C. That's the part
So your objection, I mean, sorry, Dr. Carson, with 5 minutes, your objection is not to affirmatively further. Your objection is whether that's done from Washington or the HUD office in Columbus, Ohio.
My objection is central dictation to people's lives.
Let me explore further. Along those same lines, I want to hear your views on the housing rights of lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer people. These people also face discrimination, as you know, and alarmingly high rates of youth homelessness and bullying. Your statement mentions your desire to improve the lives of all families and communities, quote, no matter their race, creed, color, or orientation. Yet you have in the past raised questions about whether LGBTQ people should enjoy the same rights as everyone else. Do you believe that HUD has a duty to take actions that promote equal access to housing opportunities for LGBTQ people?
If confirmed in this position, of course, I would enforce all the laws of the land. And I believe that all Americans, regardless of any of the things that you mentioned, should be protected by the law. What I have mentioned in the past is the fact that no one gets extra rights. Extra rights means you get to redefine everything for everybody else. That, to me, doesn't seem to be very democratic.
That's what we're talking about, but I'm glad to hear you say that moving forward, you will respect that.
Absolutely.
Last question, Mr. Chair, as time runs short. We've seen a dramatic increase in affordable housing needs in this country, as you've pointed out, Dr. Carson, in recent years. 11 million families, as I said earlier, a quarter of all renters pay more than half their income for housing, struggling to make ends meet. One thing goes wrong, a temporary layoff, hours cut back, illness, they lose their home. We talked in my office about the Matthew Desmond book, Evicted, which I hope you will read, and I know some of your staff has already.
Yes.
About people's lives being turned upside down when they're evicted. Their children's school district changes, they lose their possessions, they never quite catch up again, their credit, all of those things that happen when half of their income goes to housing. President, I am surprised the President-elect's urban agenda does not even mention housing, as we talked about. You had told me about your conversations with the President-elect about an urban agenda. Have you had discussions with him about your plans for housing or his plans for housing? Tell us what those plans, tell us what plans have come from those discussions.
Yes, yes, we have talked. In fact, we talked this morning. You have to attack the problem that you describe from both ends. There are a large number of people spending 30 to 50% of their income on housing. And that's an unacceptable number. So what we have to do is either raise their income or decrease the cost of the housing. I think both of those areas are areas that we need to work upon.
Do you support raising the minimum wage, and do you support the overtime rule, which in my state alone or in your home state of Michigan meant more than 100,000 in each state? People got raises that are making 30 and 40,000 a year. If we're talking about raising income, particularly the overtime rule would mean real dollars in people's pockets that are working 50 and 60 hours a week. Do you support those?
I support creating an environment that encourages entrepreneurial risk-taking and capital investment, which are the engines that drove America from no place to the pinnacle of the world in record time.
So I guess that means you don't support the overtime rule or the minimum wage?
It means exactly that my philosophy is that we can increase people's minimum wages by increasing opportunities for them and creating an environment where those opportunities exist rather than artificially trying to change it.
Last point, I don't think it's artificial that someone that works 50 or 60 hours a week and has been classified as those hours over 40, making $35,000 a year and not get paid for those hours. I don't think that's artificial when the employer has denied them that straight time or especially time and a half.
I agree it's not artificial, but you create the right environment, that employer will have to pay them more because the competition will require it of him.
All right, Senator Shelby.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Carson, I want to first again thank you for accepting this nomination.
Thank you.
And I want to do, a lot of us want to do everything we can to expedite this nomination. I'm going to do a little of it this morning by not using all of my 5 minutes. But we appreciate you, and we appreciate what you are and what you stand for, what you've done, and what you could do in the housing area.
Thank you.
I think you're very wise to go on a listening tour. You can learn things because all the wisdom is not here at HUD, but there's some there because
Yes.
you referenced that earlier. There's experience there. But housing goes to the very essence of a family and opportunities and a neighborhood and then a town or a city and a nation, as you know. We've got to do, there are a lot of broken things. I don't know all the answers. I've been on this committee, it's my 31st year, and I've seen a lot of HUD secretaries come and go. You can make a difference, and I believe you're taking that job to make a difference.
Thank you.
In the interest of time, and of course you're not there yet, I know that, I have 6 questions. I'm not going to read them all to you, but I'd like to get them answered not before you're confirmed, but after you're settled down.
Absolutely.
The question deals with FHA mortgage insurance premiums. Another deals with distress asset stabilization program. These are just topics. One deals with down payments, FHA. The other one is HUD spending, considering the national debt. The other is HUD and DOJ enforcement, dealing with fraud and everything that deals there. You'll have a big one. Risk sharing, there's a difference between the way the VA Farrah's loan program works and FHA, which comes under you, works, and so forth. But I'd like to submit, Mr. Chairman, these questions for the record to be answered by the future HUD Secretary, but not today. Interest of time, I'll yield back my time in the interest of getting you confirmed.
Thank you. All very important issues, by the way, and I'll be very happy to answer this.
Thank you, Senator Shelby. I appreciate the precedent that you have just set. Senator Menendez.
I appreciate and love Senator Shelby, but I'm not going to follow his precedent. So, let me say, Dr. Carson, congratulations on your nomination.
Thank you.
And Thesaura, is it, your granddaughter?
Tesora, yes.
She's got the right idea. She has her pink earphones on, so it's not an option that you have in the hearing, but nonetheless. Let me say, in preparing for this hearing and reviewing your background, I learned that we grew up in similar circumstances. We both were raised in neighborhoods with fewer opportunities, whether it be Detroit, Boston, or Union City, New Jersey. I grew up in a tenement, and we both had parents who worked twice as hard and made half as much as those in more privileged communities. We both had devoted mothers who were willing to sacrifice everything and anything to give us a chance to succeed. And you did succeed with many notable accomplishments in your field of pediatric neurosurgery. But you're nominated to lead an agency in a completely different field, and our job is to assess your fitness to lead HUD. And in reviewing your past comments and knowing where we came from to get here today, I can't help but see that you and I have arrived here with vastly divergent views about how to empower and create opportunities for the most vulnerable among us. So I have some serious questions, and I appreciate the visit you had with me in my office, about whether your worldview fits the core mission of the Department of Housing and Urban Development. You stated, quote, poverty is really more of a choice than anything else. During the CBS Republican presidential debate in February of 2016, you suggested that, quote, getting rid of all regulations is the key to, quote, getting rid of poverty. You characterize, and I know you just talked about a little bit of the legal obligations to include and create fair and inclusive communities free of discrimination as social engineering, and I want to follow up on that with you a bit. You propose that every federal agency should trim their budgets with a 10% across-the-board cuts year over year. I think of that more as a meat axe, not a neurosurgeon's knife. And I am concerned that it appears that you believe that some of the very programs that I have come to know as a mayor, as a state legislature, as a member of Congress, to empower, promote, and improve our communities, encourage what you call dependency. So given that record of your views about poverty and housing, you know, I'd like to get a sense from you, do you truly believe in the mission of HUD? For instance, should the government continue to provide rental assistance to the more than 4.5 million low-income households across this country who are currently receiving it and who use that to find a place to call home?
Thank you, Senator, for that question. First of all, if you've followed carefully what I've been saying, the concept of cutting across all the different departments was presented as a concept. In other words, not favoring one group or another group. I have modified that much later on to 1%. But the point being, we can never seem to cut because people have their programs and they say this one's sacred and this one's not. So the point being, if we can find a number on which we can agree and begin to cut back, we can start thinking about fiscal responsibility. Bear in mind, we are approaching a $20 trillion national debt.
I appreciate that. My specific question is, do you agree that the government should continue to provide rental assistance to the more than 4.5 million low-income households across this country?
I think the rental assistance program is essential. And what I have said, if you've been reading my writings, is that when it comes to entitlement programs, it is cruel and unusual punishment to withdraw those programs before you provide an alternative route.
Mm-hmm. Now, let me ask you, in response to Senator Brown, you talked about the fair housing and you said you had no problem with affirmative action or integration, but there actually is, under the law, an affirmative obligation to affirmatively further fair housing. And you said what you didn't care is for the top-down response, but yet the new rule that was developed through a 2-year public comment process requires, quote, local communities to assess their own patterns of racial and income segregation and make genuine plans to address them. That is not a top-down. So are you committed to the statutory obligation of affirmatively pursuing furthering fair housing?
Well, this has been a judgment passed down by the Supreme Court. It has become the law of the land, and of course, if confirmed, I will enforce it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Toomey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Carson, welcome to the committee. Thank you very much for your willingness to serve. I'm grateful to you for the service you have provided to our country in various ways and the service you're about to undertake. I appreciate your coming by my office and the discussion we had yesterday. It strikes me as a misguided notion to measure the success of a government agency like HUD by the number of people who live in HUD housing. A better measure, in my mind, would be how many people no longer need HUD housing. And I would like to explore that a little bit with you, especially this idea you talked about how you hope to work with other agencies and departments within the government to help develop the innate capabilities of these people that I know you feel very strongly about. But first, a couple of somewhat specific questions about FHA, if I could. In 2006, FHA insured 2.7% of mortgage originations. By 2015, FHA was insuring 17.1% of such originations. So the FHA's contingent liabilities now have absolutely ballooned to the point where it was $245 billion in 2006. It's $1.2 trillion today. So in other words, taxpayers are on the hook for $1.2 trillion worth of mortgages. That, all the while, there is a private industry that is in the business of insuring mortgages.
Right.
Do you share my concern that this massive, explosive growth in the FHA's mortgage guarantee business has interfered with a viable private alternative that does not involve taxpayer risk at all?
Thank you, Senator, and thank you for the enjoyable time we had at your office. First of all, it is a big number. I mean, 8.5 million FHA loans and $1.25 trillion. So, of course, we have to be concerned when we're talking numbers of that magnitude. We also need to make sure that we balance that against the ability of homeowners to have some security in the loans that they make. Does it have to be, one particular entity that does it? Absolutely not. But we do have to have a mechanism, a backstop, you might say, of some type. Otherwise, when someone comes in and buys up the loans, securitizes them, we're probably not going to be able to sell them, to particularly some of the entities that would buy them, because they wouldn't be comfortable. So I look forward to working with you and other members of this committee to figure out how we can shrink back the liability of the taxpayer while still providing the security for the individuals who want the loans.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that, and I look forward to working with you on that. I do believe there is a very vibrant and capable private mortgage insurance industry that wishes to provide that service, is able to do so, and does so at no taxpayer risk. I would also I know you're aware of this, Dr. Carson, but it was just this week that Secretary Castro announced a 25 basis point reduction in FHA's mortgage insurance premium. This was surprising to me for several reasons. One, the capital ratio that is the statutory requirement minimum is 2%. It's only at 2.32. This strikes me as very little buffer above the minimum, and after all, as recently as 2013, the FHA needed a bailout. So I wonder, first of all, did Secretary Castro or his folks reach out to you, or to your knowledge anyone else in the Trump organization, since you would be responsible, assuming you're confirmed, for implementing this change which is about to go into effect?
Well, no, they did not. I too was surprised to see something of this nature done on the way out the door, which of course has a profound effect. We're talking, $2 to $3 billion this year, $5 billion next year. That's not chump change. So certainly, if confirmed, I'm going to work with the FHA administrator and other financial experts to really examine that policy.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And Mr. Chairman, if you'll just indulge, my last question is just to refer back to my first point and ask Dr. Carson if you might share with us some of your thoughts about how you hope to work with other agencies, departments of the federal government to help people achieve what they're capable of achieving and the independence that comes with that.
Thank you. I think that's a very important concept. As some of you may remember, when Jack Kemp was the Secretary of HUD, he started an intergovernmental interagency program against homelessness. And it really was quite effective and very important. What I would be thinking about, if we're going to develop the whole person, is not just putting a roof over their head, but making sure that they have access to an excellent education, and their children do. That means working with the Department of Education. It means working with the Department of Labor in terms of helping to train people, not just to be people who stand out on the corner and hold a sign and basic laborers, but apprenticeship programs, because there are a lot of shovel-ready jobs, but not so many people to handle the shovels. We need cement workers and welders and brick workers and a number of people, and those skills have been vanishing from our society. This is an excellent opportunity to bring them back. Not only does it give the person an immediate job, but it provides them with a mechanism to climb the ladders of opportunity in our society and gives them stability beyond what we in the government would be facilitating, and that should be our goal. And several other areas. Transportation is absolutely crucial. I think we even need to be working with the Justice Department because there are some inequities there that are keeping us from developing talent that can contribute to the strength of our nation.
Thank you very much, Dr. Carson. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Warren.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and congratulations on your new role as chair of this committee. I'm looking forward to working with you, as well as with 6 new members of our committee. And Dr. Carson, thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Before we get into some of the questions that I raised in my letter to you earlier this week, I just want to get an answer to, I think, a simple yes or no question. If you are confirmed to lead HUD, you'll be responsible for issuing billions of dollars in grants and loans to help develop housing and provide a lot of housing-related services. Now, housing development is an area in which President-elect Trump and his family have significant business interests. Can you assure me that not a single taxpayer dollar that you give out will financially benefit the president-elect or his family?
Well, Senator, I was worried that you wouldn't get back. Thank you for coming back.
I'm back.
I can assure you that the things that I do are driven by a sense of morals and values. And therefore, I will absolutely not play favorites for anyone.
Dr. Carson, let me stop right there. I'm actually trying to ask a more pointed question, and it's not about your good faith. That's not my concern. My concern is whether or not, among the billions of dollars that you will be responsible for handing out in grants and loans, can you just assure us that not $1 will go to benefit either the president-elect or his family?
It will not be my intention to do anything to benefit any American.
I understand that.
It's for all Americans, everything that we do.
Do I take that to mean that you may manage programs that will significantly benefit the president-elect?
You can take it to mean that I will manage things in a way that benefits the American people. That is going to be the goal.
To the best you understand that.
If there happens to be an extraordinarily good program that's working for millions of people, and it turns out that someone that you're targeting is going to gain, $10 from it, am I going to say, no, the rest of you Americans can't have it? I think logic and common sense probably would be the best way.
Yeah, although we do have a problem here, and I appreciate your good faith in this, and I do, Dr. Carson. The problem is that you can't assure us that HUD money, not of $10 varieties, but of multi-million-dollar varieties, will not end up in the president-elect's pockets. And the reason you can't assure us of that is because the president-elect is hiding his family's business interests from you, from me, from the rest of America. And this just highlights the absurdity and the danger of the president-elect's refusal to put his assets in a true blind trust. He knows, the president-elect knows, what will benefit him and his family financially, but the public doesn't, which means he can divert taxpayer money into his own pockets without anyone knowing about it. The only way that the American people can know that the president is working in their best interests and not in his own is if he divests and puts his assets in a true blind trust. Transferring his holdings to his children does nothing, as the head of the Nonpartisan Ethics Committee said just last night. Since the president-elect refuses to address this voluntarily, we need to pass the Presidential Conflicts of Interest Act that I introduced with more than 20 of my colleagues, which would require him to do so. So, with the time I have left, I just want to follow up very quickly on a letter that I sent to you earlier this week and that we talked about in my office.
And I appreciated that.
Good. And I appreciated it too. As you know, more than 7 million children rely on HUD for housing. 7 million people. Many of them are children, veterans, people with disabilities. For many of these people, HUD is the difference between a stable home and life out on the streets. But one major problem that we talked about is lead exposure. And according to the most recent HUD study, 62,000 public housing units, nearly 6% of our total public housing stock, are in need of lead abatement. You are a highly accomplished doctor. We spoke at length about the implications of lead and lead poisoning on our children. Can I just ask you to commit today that you will make sure that HUD resources are dedicated to dramatically reducing the number of public housing units where lead is a problem?
Well, I can assure you that I will very much be working with you on that. 310,000 cases right now of children, each of which cost us enormous amounts of money. I don't think people even calculate that into that when we're talking about it. So yes, I will be very vigorous in that area.
I very much appreciate it. This is a particular problem for us in the Northeast. It is a particular problem in Boston where our housing stock is old.
Right.
And it is absolutely critical that we get the lead out of these housing units and that our children have a chance to grow up without being injured by our own negligence. I look forward to working with you.
Thank you for your leadership in that area.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Carson.
Senator Heller.
Mr. Chairman, thank you, and congratulations on the new chairmanship.
Thank you.
I look forward to working with you. And Dr. Carson, it's good to see you, and I
too.
welcome you, and congratulations on your nominee and for your family.
Thank you.
I think that's wonderful. And I still fondly remember Ben Jr. Out in Carson City, Nevada, at a parade that we had, and then he came over to a chili feed. I don't know how much chili he ate, but his presence was appreciated. So thank you very much for taking that time. I want to reiterate something that I said in our conversation in my office, and that is if you are the designated survivor, would you call my office and let me know?
Absolutely.
I got a couple of questions for you, and I think it's just, actually I got a lot of questions for you, but a couple of basic questions that I think every HUD secretary should be asked. And question number one is, do you believe that everybody should own a home?
I believe that everybody should have an opportunity to own a home.
Do you believe that we should preserve and protect the 30-year home loan mortgage?
I believe the 30-year home loan mortgage has enabled millions of Americans to achieve the American dream. I think there are probably a number of ways to preserve that dream.
Do you support a federal government backstop like Fannie or Freddie or any other entity similar to that of the U.S. housing financial markets?
I do support some type of backstop, but I also am very much in favor of introducing more private entities into the market.
You'll be willing to work with this committee on what alternatives those may be?
I would very much look forward to doing that.
Dr. Carson, I appreciate that answer. Let me go to another topic, and that's the fact that we have over 300,000 veterans in the state of Nevada. Las Vegas and Reno, veteran homelessness remains a very serious problem. But things have gotten a little better, and thankful to the private sector and people getting involved and helping, but it still remains an issue. We have 200 veterans in Reno that have qualified for vouchers to help pay for rent. There's still about 50 vouchers available. My question is, how will you continue to help the homeless veteran? And how will HUD better coordinate the efforts with the VA, nonprofits, and community organization to help these veterans that are in need?
Well, you know, people who go out and risk life and limb for us are people that should never want for any basic thing. We should be willing to do it. You know, the VASH program, Veterans Affairs Supportive Housing Program, has been very successful in reducing homelessness, but we still have a lot more to go. And I think this is another area where we must take a holistic viewpoint. And what I've advocated is that when a person joins the military, they be associated with a support group at that time. That support group follows them through their entire military career, particularly when they're in combat and after they are discharged. That way you discover early on what problems are occurring and are able to intervene at that point, which is considerably cheaper than waiting until we see the results of post-traumatic stress disorder.
Thank you, Dr. Carson. A statistic that's unfortunate in the state of Nevada is that 17% of Las Vegas area homeowners with mortgages are underwater. What would you and HUD do to help Nevada homeowners that owe more on their mortgage than what their home is worth?
Well, as you know, we do have some programs targeted at such individuals if they qualify. But one of the things that I believe is essential is that we begin to, like the RASPA program, giving people the appropriate information before they actually get into mortgage trouble. I believe that one of the things that we could do at HUD is have a teaching mechanism. And it can be done on several different levels, at a very elementary level, at a moderate, and at a more sophisticated level, so that people do not wind up in those situations. But the ones who are there already, I think there's a possibility of working with members of the private sector, and I think it's an area that we've neglected quite substantially. There are faith groups and there are business groups who are very magnanimous and willing to help, and I'm going to be working hard on developing those opportunities for them, because in many cases the reason they haven't gotten involved is because there's a lack of trust. And if we can create that trust, there's an enormous amount of goodwill. I don't think we have to continue to come to the government for everything.
Dr. Carson, my time has run out, but thank you very much for your time. And
thank you.
EJ, I look forward to seeing you at the next chili feed. Thank you, and congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Donnelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and congratulations on your chairmanship. I look forward to working with you. Dr. Carson, congratulations on being here today.
Thank you.
To your son, I'd like to welcome you to a chili event in Indiana anytime. We may have a little different recipe than Nevada, but I'm sure you'll enjoy it. Dr. Carson, I talked to you in my office about East Chicago.
Yes.
Hard by the Chicago border. And we have a situation where a housing complex was built on top of an old lead company.
Yes.
More than 300 families' lives have been upended and put at risk due to the presence of significant levels of lead and arsenic in the soil. HUD is a big part of the relocation effort, and you'll be coming in the middle of this.
Yes.
In effect, it's going to be handed off to you. And roughly half the residents are still on site, half the residents we've been able to move. We're pursuing emergency HUD funding for the safety and security and ultimately the demolition of the complex. Can I have your commitment that HUD will continue to be part of the leadership of this effort and to dedicate the resources necessary to get this right for the residents and for the local officials of our town?
Absolutely. Whenever we're in a Superfund situation and lives are in danger and our children are in danger of being poisoned, I believe that becomes an emergency, and we will push very hard to complete that process.
We're really going to need you as a teammate on this, and all of the children there appreciate it, and the families do as well. I wanted to ask you, when I was in the House, I served on the Veterans Affairs Committee. I serve on Armed Services Committee now. One of the biggest housing challenges we face is for our veterans, who many are homeless. One of my cities, Kokomo, built a 29-unit complex for homeless veterans. And the question among some was, would there be enough to fill this? Because Kokomo is not the biggest town. It's an awesome town, but not the biggest town. And on day one, what we found out was 29 was not enough.
Right.
And it's that way across the country. And every night there are veterans who are putting their heads down on concrete somewhere. And whether it's their economic situations or PTSD or some other challenge that they have, I'd really like HUD to be part of the solution of this. The VA is deeply involved in this.
Yes.
But with HUD, the first H is housing. And we owe it to our men and women who have served this country to make sure they have a decent bed to sleep in at night. And if you would make sure that you have people dedicated to this proposition, it would go a long way toward meeting the commitments we've made and the promises we've made.
Well, I'm very proud of the VASH program. I believe that it needs more enhancement, and what you're saying reflects very well my sentiments.
Thank you. Another challenge, you know, we have not only in Indiana but across this country, the opioid drug epidemic. I discussed with you the town of Austin, Indiana, where we wound up in a city of 4,200, where 197
right.
contracted HIV, and they've been fighting back, and I'm very proud of the people of that town. You'll have the opportunity to assist individuals suffering from chronic illness through housing and combating homelessness. As we look at this, could you tell me a little bit, you know, you have tremendous medical background as well. Your understanding of the connection between housing and health outcomes and trying to leverage the agency to combat opioid abuse and some of these situations we see.
Well, the nexus is great between healthcare and housing, and it's not just the contamination with lead and other agents, and it's not just the mold and things that cause chronic asthma, which is a huge medical cost for us across the country each year. But it's also the safety issue, the psychological well-being. I was talking to a student in Baltimore who was sitting in her living room studying, and a bullet came through the window. It becomes very, very difficult to concentrate under those circumstances. And so, you know, we need to be looking at safety as a component of that as well. So again, some of the programs that we have, the choice program, for instance, that tries to come in and ameliorate the environment, I think those are actually very, very important programs for the health of the individual.
Thank you, Doctor. My time is up. The last thing I'll say is the Hardest Hit program has been very helpful to not only my state but many others, so please keep that in mind.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Doctor. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and congratulations to your new chairmanship.
Thank
and
you.
We all wish you much success. I would also ask for unanimous consent to add to the record from the South Carolina African American Chamber of Commerce a letter of support on behalf of Dr. Carson.
Without objection.
Thank you very much. Dr. Carson, and to your family, thank you all for being willing to serve. No question, if you are confirmed, your entire family will feel the impact of your service to this country. There's no doubt that if there's a person in this country that has really no reason to offer yourself to public service after all that you've already done, it would be you. You've done a fabulous job and been a great example for many of us in many ways. And like Senator Menendez suggested, his background as well as my background and yours are very similar. Right. I reached a type of conclusion that you have, however, that there is so much potential inside the human heart and the human head and brain that we ought to look for ways to expose that potential.
Exactly.
Allow for people to experience their full potential. That is such an important part of the equation. And I believe, like you believe, I think, that the greatest thing that we can do for folks is help them find the path to their own independence.
Exactly.
It is not to suggest that government does not have a role. It is, however, to suggest that government does not have the role in someone's life. And I think that your life demonstrates that, as well as your answers to so many of the questions. I think it's been very important. I also want to thank you for your desire to do a listening tour. We have had many issues around housing for many decades, frankly. When I was on the county level as the chairman of a county council in South Carolina, we had housing concerns and issues, and listening to the very people who live in the housing is such an important part of the formula that we should produce that will benefit the American people, and specifically the American people within public housing. Exactly. And so that willingness is important. I wish that the outgoing administration had the same objective of listening. Even the senators would be kind of interesting. So I would encourage you to listen to the senators and folks who appoint you to the position at HUD. Whether that's Democrats or Republicans, it's very important to remain responsive. And I will use one case in point. There was a housing tragedy in Florida where Marco Rubio and Senator Nelson spent enormous amount of time uncovering the challenges and the lack of inspections in HUD housing. We invited HUD to participate in one of the hearings. No one showed up. $47 billion agency, thousands of employees here in Washington, D.C., and we couldn't find anyone to listen. Listen to the elected officials who had serious concerns about the living conditions of people in public housing. Not a single employee could find their way into the United States chambers. I can't imagine how that made them feel about their government, about their opportunities for success, about their opportunities to find the next rung on the ladder. I expect that under your leadership, the experience will be very different.
Incredibly different than that.
One of the things I found refreshing about your approach is indeed the notion of a fresh start in housing. Someone who holistically understands and appreciates the necessity of affordable, clean, stable housing as a part of that journey to the American dream. I would love to hear your thoughts on how you incorporate the holistic approach to the new opportunity that, if presented to you, you'll do a fantastic job with.
Well, thank you, Senator Scott, and also for the wonderful example that you are for millions of people. The reason that I concentrate so much on the holistic approach is because when I look back historically at an agency like HUD, and there have been a lot of good programs, and one program after another, and they've been targeted at specific problems, and it's good, but the progress perhaps has not been as great as one would like to see. And one of the things that I discovered as a neurosurgeon is you're much more effective when you bring in a bigger picture view of things. Don't just look at, the tumor that somebody has in their brain, but look at the whole person and how can you bring health to this entire individual, and how can you then put them into an environment where they can thrive? And that's the same principle that I'm looking at here. The programs that have been enacted in HUD over the years, they're good programs, but in and of themselves, they're not bringing about the elevation of large numbers of people. And that's what we're really looking for. We don't want it to be a way of life. We want it to be a Band-Aid and a springboard to move forward. So that's why I place so much emphasis on education. And that's why I place so much emphasis on health care. I'm not just talking about lead abatement, but I'm talking about perhaps putting clinics into neighborhoods so that people don't rely on the emergency room where it costs 5 times more and where you don't get the kind of follow-up that will prevent you from having stage 5 renal disease. That's what I'm talking about by a holistic approach. It saves us so much money if we begin to think that way.
Fresh start. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Schatz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for having me on the committee, Ranking Member Brown as well. Dr. Carson, thank you for our visit earlier this week. It was a
wonderful.
pleasure
Thank you.
To get to know you. There's been a lot of talk about your political philosophy in the context of your previous years, a political campaign running for president, your personal views about poverty. I appreciate all that, and I appreciate that you seem to understand that you're possibly entering into a new role, and that is, it's different. And I can see the evolution even during this hearing. But let me just talk about where the rubber hits the road when it comes to leading an agency, and that is in advocacy for the budget. In the end, in the presidential budget process, in the appropriations process, at this authorizing level, I need to know that you're going to advocate for the HUD budget And for me, that's a threshold question that you are not going to. There are other nominees who I think some of us feel are going to lead an agency in order to undermine its mission. I don't hear that from you, but I would like to hear the words that you would like to advocate for the HUD budget.
Okay. Not only do I want to advocate for the HUD budget, but, you know, in the process of doing a listening tour and talking to the people who are there already, I want to put together a world-class plan on housing in this country. And then I want to come to you with that world-class plan. And I want to convince you all that this is what we need to do. I don't know what that number is going to be, quite frankly. It might be more, it might be less, but it will be what is required to accomplish what we need to do.
Thank you. Following up on a couple of questions around rental assistance, you and I talked about the kind of perception among most people, and it's actually left, right, and center, that in some instances public housing can feel like a trap, and certainly members of this committee and you yourself have transcended very difficult circumstances, and it wasn't government that helped you to do that. I understand all that. But there is abundant evidence now that specifically when you think about assisting people in transcending their circumstances, when you need that hand up rather than a hand out, that it does start with housing. And that even though we have great difficulties in our public housing authorities, even though the Section 8 program is imperfect, there is now HUD data that demonstrates that families that get rental assistance do better than families that don't. And I'm not talking about doing better during that period of time. I'm talking about in terms of moving up the economic ladder, that actually if you square away someone's housing situation, that's the best way to situate them so they can deal with their health, their education, and whatever family problems they may need to contend with.
Yes.
I'd like your thoughts in that area.
Well, my thought is that, as I mentioned before, the things that we have been doing and the programs, they're life-saving. They're safety net. Do I think we can do better? Absolutely. And do I think we should be spending a little more time and effort concentrating on developing the potential of our people? And the answer to that is yes, particularly in light of the fact that we have so many fewer people than some of our competitors, and it's going to be absolutely essential that we do that.
One final question. I used to run a social service agency in Honolulu, and one of the things that we came to understand before the vernacular was established was that especially somebody who has a co-occurring substance abuse problem or who is contending with mental health challenges or has employment issues, that they have no fighting chance to contend with any of those issues unless you deal with their housing. And for many not-for-profit organizations that provide services or even provide housing, in some instances it's actually a prerequisite to get sober, to get clean, to have all your behaviors squared away in order to receive the housing assistance.
Right.
HUD and others have figured out that as attractive as that may be for the service provider and as sort of neat as that logic appears to be, the truth is it just doesn't work. And that's why Salt Lake City and many other states have adopted, and eventually HUD adopted, this idea of housing first.
Right.
I'd like your thoughts on housing first, and I'd like your assurance that you're certainly going to look at everything with new eyes, but that you appreciate the basic premise, which is that unless you put a roof over somebody's head, they're not going to be able to move up that economic ladder.
Well, you know, the Housing First program is certainly one of the ones that I want to study and look at the data. You know, I know of one individual who was chronically homeless and having a very difficult time with substance abuse, who through that program not only became employed, but was able to purchase their own home. So, you know, there's some tremendous success stories there. And again, these are our political capital. So those are programs that we will study carefully, see what we can derive from those and how we can take those lessons and multiply them across the nation.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Schatz. Senator Rounds is next, but without objection, I'm going to allow Senator Corker to, because he's got some multiple conflicts here, to take a few moments.
Very briefly,
Thank you.
I want to thank you for coming by the office. I look forward to working with you as you ascend to this very important position. I would not be in the United States Senate had it not been for efforts as a young businessman leading a nonprofit to help people have decent, fit, and affordable housing. This is an outstanding committee, have outstanding leadership. You're going to enjoy working with everyone here, and I look forward to helping you in any way I can. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. And Senator Rounds.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, we only get 5 minutes in which we're supposed to supposedly interrogate you. And I can tell you that after our first meeting, I shared with a number of people how much I enjoyed just the discussion, your interest, and your desire to actually be actively involved. And I got to thinking back that I think there was some concern that you're not a housing expert and that you don't have a background in construction and so forth. And yet I got to thinking, it seems to me that probably running this department is not really brain surgery. And then if you can handle that, you most certainly have the capabilities to step in and to look at this with fresh eyes.
Thank you.
One of the items that we talked about was Native American housing in South Dakota and in rural areas. I just like, I'm not sure that you even had a chance to look at any of the materials that we had shared with you, but there was a real strong concern on the part of Native Americans in the rural areas that the current formula in which funds are being distributed by HUD was not following that which had been recommended by some senior staff, and in fact was following an old guideline.
Yes.
And I'm not going to ask you to make commitments, but would you please look at and just agree that you'll give it fair consideration, that we find a fairer way to make sure that these folks that literally have homes that it's all they've got, and in some cases that might be a $5,000 valued home, that there be a way that we get these folks the resources they need so they get a chance at housing as well.
Well, thank you for advocating for them. I mean, this is a situation that has weighed heavily on my mind as I've learned more and more about it. You know, we have a $650 million budget plus $66 million, but the Native American Housing Assistance Self-Determination Act has been sort of waiting to be re-upped for 6 years. So, I'm looking forward to the Senate, going ahead and reauthorizing that act in the very near future. And the amount of red tape on the reservations, as you know, is astonishing. I mean, on tribal lands, if you want to build a house, you have to get permission from HUD, permission from the Interior. If you want to put a driveway on it, you have to get permission from the Department of Transportation. I mean, this is craziness. So we need to bring back a little bit of common sense and have the people associated with those tribes involved in that decision making.
Do you believe that there's a possibility that we could coordinate efforts on VA housing as well on reservations? This is a case where last year I found out that literally the Minneapolis region had led the nation in the number of VA loans authorized in the entire nation, and they had authorized 5. This is a system which is broken.
It is
and yet VA has lots of different things they do. This is not part of HUD. Nonetheless, it seems to me that there should be a coordinated effort to provide literally getting the results for people that live in poverty today. Veterans who we shouldn't be, they shouldn't be looking for a handout. What we should be doing is providing them with the service which they are entitled to. And I would hope that perhaps with a fresh look, there could be some coordinated efforts to provide that service.
Well, thank you, sir. I think veterans can be a healing balm for all of us because we can all agree on that.
Also in South Dakota, we're a small state. We receive funds annually for the Community Development Block Grants, CDBGs. They're often used in low and moderate income communities in order to invest in infrastructure developments that allow for less expensive housing to be developed. As a former governor, I remember we looked forward to being able to utilize CDBGs. They were valuable. They really did extend the amount of money that we had available. Can you give me your assessment on CDBGs and a commitment that CDBGs are critical, and if any way that there can be expanded And in terms of dollars going into very good projects,
Right.
just your basic thoughts on the CDBG program.
I think, well, obviously, it's one of the major programs of the Community Planning and Development Division. Very important because it gives people a great deal of flexibility. I'd be actually looking to increase the flexibility, but at the same time have a much better control of the finances. One of the reasons that the finances have not been carefully controlled and why the Inspector General has been critical, I think lies with the fact that our IT is so far behind. Our computer systems are dated, and it's much easier for people to, do things under the table. That's one of the things that I'd be looking to fix right away.
Very good. Thank you. I look forward to supporting your nomination. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Van Hollen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your welcoming remarks, you and the ranking member. Dr. Carson, it's great to see you. And as somebody who represents the state of Maryland, I want to thank you for the good work you did as a neurosurgeon at Johns Hopkins and the good work you've done in East Baltimore. And you certainly know the city of Baltimore. And when you and I met yesterday, I mentioned that after the Freddie Gray tragedy in Baltimore City, President Obama established a White House task force to help Baltimore City by trying to break down some of the silos among different federal agencies. And I asked you then whether you would urge the incoming president to continue that White House task force. You indicated yes. I just want to make sure that we're on the same page.
I very much on that page of integrating the silos and taking holistic views of virtually everything. The synergy that we derive from that will be great.
And continuing this White House task force, I hope we can work together to continue that going forward.
The more we work, the better. Together, the better.
Let me, and Freddie Gray actually brings up the issue that there's been some discussion about of lead paint poisoning because there was significant evidence that he'd been a victim of lead paint poisoning. So I'm encouraged by your remarks. I would only say that there's been a lot of talk, and you made remarks about regulations hindering progress in certain ways. I can tell you in the state of Maryland, we had a lot of absentee landlords who were fighting our efforts to put in place regulations to stop lead paint poisoning. So I assume that those kind of regulations are good regulations.
Absolutely.
Would you agree with that? All right.
I'm just a little wary of over-regulating, as were the founders of this country.
I think we all are. There's a regulation that is not serving its purpose. We should be getting rid of it.
Right.
If there's a regulation that's needed to protect the public good,
absolutely,
we should probably put it in place. And I do, my colleagues have asked you about some of your previous comments as they relate to this new job, and I just wanted to do the same thing on some, because there's this ongoing conversation about federal government programs not creating opportunity but creating dependency. We all want to use these programs to create opportunity so people can lift themselves up and become self-sufficient. That is a shared goal. And during the campaign, you did make some disparaging comments about housing subsidies specifically, along with a litany of other things, saying, that, there are people who say I'm compassionate and they pat people on their head and say, there you are, poor little thing. I'm going to take care of your needs, and you mentioned housing subsidies as one of those. As I understand your testimony today, you see an important positive role for housing subsidies as part of an effort to help families get on their feet as a safety net and move on. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. I also agree with you. We had this conversation in my office about the fact, and you said it this morning, that just having a roof over your head doesn't necessarily solve someone's problems. You want to expand educational opportunities, and I could not agree with you more. Greater synergy there would be important. I do want to also note, though, that many of those housing subsidies go to families who don't have children. In fact, if you look at the rental assistance figures, more than 4.5 million low-income households receive them, half of which are headed by seniors or persons with disabilities.
Right.
And for those individuals, the wraparound help they need to be self-sufficient relates many times to health care. Now, during the campaign, the incoming president tweeted, Ben Carson wants to abolish Medicare. I want to save it and Social Security. That was October 25th, 2015, 5:20 p.m. You've also have indicated you want to get rid of Medicaid, which is an important health safety net for so many people. So given your earlier comments about the importance of wraparound supports, the roof not being enough by itself, and the fact that so many millions of people who receive rental subsidies are seniors or people with disabilities, are you going to advocate within the government abolishing Medicare and Medicaid?
No, you have to go back and understand the context of replacing that with something else. Obviously, if you're not going to replace it, you're not going to get rid of major safety nets.
Right. If I recall, you were going to replace both those programs with health savings accounts. I just want to say, Dr. Carson, no, I'm quoting the incoming president with respect to your position.
Yeah, but he was the incoming president who was running against me. Remember that.
All right. I just want the record to show the doctor, you said he distorted your position, not me. All right?
Okay.
Senator Tillis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks to you and the ranking member. I'm looking forward to serving on this committee. Dr. Carson, welcome to your sons, their beautiful families, and especially to your wife. Gosh, I don't know where to start, but I do want to thank you for the amount of time that you spent in my office. I thought it was interesting that at least one person spent close to 4 minutes and 30 seconds talking to you about the hypothetical of the incoming administration potentially benefiting their business or the family members. That seems absurd to me, but you know what I like most about the answer to your question? You would not get pinned down to a yes or no answer. You said what matters most is the benefit to the people that we're trying to serve. That, my friend, tells me that you're a very honest person. You could have been attacked for that. I don't know if it was just nuanced and the person who asked you that question didn't understand what you said, or if they just decided that was too principled an answer to take you on. So thank you for that answer, and keep those principles in place. Now, as a practical matter, before the fake news cycles start, I doubt seriously that scenario will ever come up, and I'm kind of tired of the hypotheticals. I want to get to the specific.
Thank you.
We're in a situation, I was Speaker of the House in North Carolina, and I was criticized for the means, but not the ends, for a number of things that you're going to have to do too. I'll give you an example of a state-administered government assistance program. It's called unemployment reform. I'm the only Speaker of the House in the nation that ratified a bill that did not extend long-term unemployment benefits. At the time, we were fourth highest unemployment in the nation. Over 5 quarters, we dropped from 10.4% to 6.4%. to the national average, while all the other states that didn't take that action remain the same place. What is the best possible thing we can do for somebody who's on government assistance?
Get them off of it.
Get them a job.
Absolutely.
So what we're here to talk about is not the ends. I think we all agree. We want people to have housing. We want every child that grows up to be able to realize the American dream.
Right.
This has to do with the means. And in my opinion, the means over the past couple of decades have failed. It's been a bipartisan failure, more recently with Democratic leadership, but before that, Republican leadership. Now, when you go into housing and urban development, can I get your commitment that you're going to look at every program and determine which ones are actually providing the benefit to that next Ben Carson who may come up with his mom and be a neurosurgeon, and eliminate every single obstacle in the way?
You can absolutely get my guarantee on that.
Do you think there are any sacred cows in HUD that stand in the way of that outcome?
I've been studying it carefully, and I haven't seen one yet.
Do you think that to a certain extent over the years we've gone from providing housing to providing warehousing for an unacceptable number of people who are supported through the federal government?
Well, the key to your question there was the word unacceptable, and yes, absolutely.
And do you believe that HUD and the other agencies have creeped their scope over time, and that you could be someone who may actually say that HUD needs to be smaller, or some other organization needs to be smaller so that the people best positioned to provide the safety net, the agency best positioned to provide the safety net can do it, and you can complement in some points and take the lead in others?
I believe we need to be much more efficient. And that efficiency involves being able to work together and stop duplicating services, and that's why I'm very interested in working across the silos.
Do you believe that things that we can do to improve education outcomes, to potentially, and in my case, hopefully, move forward with criminal justice reform, getting nonviolent offenders into rehabilitated settings and reducing recidivism will make your job easier?
It will make all of our jobs easier, absolutely.
Do you believe that the role that social services outside of education that serve communities, at-risk communities, do you think that we should have all agencies create these duplicative operations? Or if I've got an at-risk school system, do you think the Department of Education should grow to serve that need, or that we need to do a better job of using the various agencies whose primary goal is to serve that segment of the community?
Definitely, we need to do a much better job.
So will you commit to me, if you identify anything that seems duplicative to any other agency, that you will come before this committee and say, we want to move it, have someone else on it, and have them be accountable for the results?
I'm very much looking forward to working with this committee to do that, absolutely.
I appreciate your forthrightness. I think you've done a great job in this committee and a great job in your career. I look forward to supporting your nomination.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Senator Cortez Masto.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Ranking Member. As a new member of the committee, I look forward to working with all of you.
Welcome.
And thank you very much. And Dr. Carson, welcome.
Thank you.
And congratulations on your nomination, and welcome to your wonderful family sitting here with you. There's been a lot of questions. With your indulgence, I'm just going to get right to them because I know it's getting a long day for you and morning. And just my colleagues have asked a number of questions, and I would like to just kind of reaffirm some of them. In your role as the leader of HUD, will you promise to protect the LGBTQ community from discrimination?
Absolutely.
And as we know, there's a long and well-documented history of patterns and policies of segregation of minorities in our neighborhoods. Would you continue to aggressively enforce the FHA, which is dedicated to ensuring access to our country's housing is free of discrimination, including expeditiously and thoroughly investigating race and national origin complaints, ensuring fair mortgage lending for homeowners, and carrying out strategies to end homelessness?
I think the Fair Housing Amendment in 1968 was one of the best pieces of legislation we've had. It was modified in 1988. LBJ said no one could possibly question this. I agree with them.
Good. So you would continue to enforce it aggressively?
Absolutely.
Including the new HUD rule that requires local communities to assess their own patterns of racial and income segregation and make genuine plans to address them?
I will be working with the local HUD officials and the communities to make sure that fairness is carried out.
Okay. I appreciate you taking the time to come to my office and sit with me. And in that meeting, you made a number of statements like you have this morning on your vision for HUD and how the department would or would not intervene in individuals' lives. Specifically, you said that we don't want year after year people vegetating in public housing. And these comments were a little concerning to me, and for this reason. In Nevada, the fair market rent for a two-bedroom apartment is around $950 per month. In order to afford this level of rent and utilities, a household has to earn $38,000 annually. Nevada, a minimum wage worker earns an hourly wage of $7.25 or $8.25 if their insurance isn't being paid for, which is about $15,000 annually. In order to just cover that two-bedroom rent apartment, that individual making minimum wage would have to work 88 hours per week, which, as you can see, doesn't leave much time for not only a funding for education or much other opportunities to further themselves other than just putting a roof over the head for them and their families. That doesn't sound like to me somebody who's vegetating in public housing. You also mentioned to one of my colleagues that you believe that additional housing funding, rental assistance is essential. But when we talked, you said there were limits. And do you believe that low-income Americans should have a limit to public assistance? And can you further define that for me?
Well, what I'm saying is that we have to be cognizant of our fiscal responsibilities as well as our social responsibilities. Would we love to put every single person in a beautiful unit forever? Absolutely, that would be ideal. But we don't necessarily have the necessary funding. But the other thing that I emphasize is that safety net programs are important. I would never, advocate abolishing them without having an alternative route for people to follow.
So how would you help somebody find that alternative if all they're doing is working and coming home and working, and
well,
that's all they can afford? How would you help them other than giving them a time limit in that public housing and then they have to leave?
Well, there's a much bigger picture issue here, and that is fixing our economy and working very hard to create the right kind of atmosphere. When that happens, people have a lot more options in terms of their jobs, and people have to raise their salaries.
Okay. And then Nevada was hardest hit. We were ground zero for the foreclosure crisis. As the Attorney General of the state, one of my biggest partners was your agency. Aggressively, we worked together to bring relief to homeowners there, including what you talked about, financial relief, but also financial literacy and education.
Right.
Through that, I created the Home Again program, and it still is in existence in the state of Nevada to provide financial literacy and help to homeowners for the first-time home buyers, for individuals who want to get back into their homes. Is that a program that you see that you can continue to support and would look to help support in the state of Nevada?
I will certainly study that program carefully and work with you to make sure that the goals of that program are carried forward.
Thank you. I appreciate your questions today, or excuse me, the answers to your questions today. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you, Senator Kennedy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Carson, when you were performing neurosurgery at Johns Hopkins Hospital, were you concerned primarily with how much the operation cost and how much money you were generating for the hospital, or were you primarily concerned with fixing your patient's problem?
Primarily concerned with fixing the problem, absolutely.
I want you to understand my agenda. I'm not interested in taking away affordable housing from people in need. I am interested in seeing fewer people need affordable housing. How are you going to do that?
Again, it goes back to the conversation we were just having. We have got to give people a springboard to get out of a situation of stagnation and develop their God-given talents. We have got to create an environment which we can do, through tax reform, through regulatory reform, through trade reform, through a number of things that creates an environment. And then we can also, the people who, for instance, are stuck in those situations, there's absolutely no reason that we can't require some training, some education, some skills, which then allow them to be much more independent and move up. So that's really what I'm talking about, just not sort of leaving the system as it is and just continuing to feed the system, but really trying to develop our people. And it goes back to what I was talking about before. If we're going to compete in the future with nations that have 3 and 4 times as many people as we do, we have got to develop our people. We've got to get the bang for the buck.
I want to talk to you about the Community Development Block Grant Program. As we talked about in my office, Louisiana had massive flooding last year. In March, the northern part of our state received about 25 inches of rain in 3 days. That's more rain than the city of Los Angeles got in 3 years. And then in August, South Louisiana flooded. We got about 27 inches of rain in 3 days. Most of the people who flooded didn't live in a floodplain. They didn't need health insurance or need flood insurance. And the truth is, if you get 27 inches of rain or 25 inches in 3 days, you can live on Mount Everest and you're going to flood. So we had a lot of people hurt badly. The American taxpayer has been very generous through the members of Congress. Congress has appropriated about $1.6 billion to our people. It's going to come in the form of community development block grants.
Right.
Now, there's some confusion. Our governor has a plan to spend part of that money. He doesn't have a plan to spend the other part. He has blamed HUD. I've spoken off the record with some of the HUD officials. They say it's the state's problem. Frankly, I don't care whose fault it is. Congress has acted. The American taxpayer has been extraordinarily generous. I just want to figure out how to get that $1.6 billion to folks so they can start rebuilding their lives. Would you commit to me that as Secretary of HUD, and I believe you will be Secretary of HUD, that you will ask your folks not to break any rules and not to break any laws, but to demonstrate some of that flexibility you were talking about?
Yes.
To keep their eye on the ball. Let's try to get the money into the hands of the folks for whom it was appropriated, as opposed to discussing how many lawyers can dance on the head of a pin.
Well, thank you, Senator, and I enjoyed our conversation previously. You're singing my song here. You know, I've been talking to mayors across this country and housing authorities, and they all say what you just said. They appreciate the grant money, but they have to jump through too many hoops, and there's too much red tape. And I look forward to working not only with the people at HUD, but with the recipients of the grants, so we can figure out how to streamline this procedure. And by utilizing the IT technology to you know, eliminate a lot of waste and fraud, I think we can really get a lot of bang for our buck here.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you, sir.
You'll be a great HUD secretary.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Tester.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And as others have said before, I look forward to your leadership on this committee, and I appreciate you being in this position. You've been there before and done a fine job, and I have no doubt you'll do a fine job moving into the future. Dr. Carson, thanks for putting yourself up for this, and as others have said, thank you to your family for their support of you in this position. Others have talked about the similarities of how you've grown up with them. You haven't grown up with the same similarities that I have. I've grown up in the West, and I can tell you that I would not be in the position I'm in without the Homestead Act, without the measures that President Roosevelt took in the dirty 30s. We would have been off the farm and gone from Montana. And even today, and I'm not particularly proud of this, but even today, agriculture still gets significant subsidies to keep themselves going. So I think we both agree that government plays an important role in whatever we do, and housing is no exception. I can also tell you that from a regulatory standpoint, we don't enforce things like the Packers and Stockyard Act, and that's one of the reasons we still have ag subsidies. So there is room for regulation in this. I want to touch on one thing that was said, and it deals with this, and you have no control over this. But why the blind trust is so important is because we elect people to offices like U.S. senators and President of the United States, not for personal gain, but for the betterment of the country.
Sure.
And I can tell you, you're not going to be able to tell what happens if that is not put into a true blind trust, just like Jay Rockefeller did when he was in the U.S. Senate. We're not asking him to do anything different than what's been done before. One of the problems with coming late to a committee hearing is everything's been said, but not everybody said it, so I'm going to say it. Affordable housing is, and by the way, thanks for coming to my office. Affordable housing. I
enjoyed it. Particularly seeing that buffalo.
Darn right. You come out, we'll show you some that are walking around. The affordable housing is critically important, and I can give you plenty of examples. We talk about a holistic view, which I agree with. Plenty of examples where there isn't affordable housing, there isn't the economic opportunity, there isn't the opportunity to create jobs, there's an opportunity to move the economy forward. I was just in Havre, Montana, 10,000 people visiting with business leaders. They can't get new businesses to come in because they don't have a workforce that can be housed. So we're not talking just about poor.
Sure.
We're talking about everybody. If we're going to increase the middle class, you're going to be a big part of that. Another thing is the 30-year note. Pretty special to the United States. I mean, it really is.
Absolutely.
But it has allowed tons, millions of people to get into housing that wouldn't otherwise be there. So my question to you is, do you believe it is possible to have a 30-year mortgage without a government guarantee?
Yes, I think it is possible.
How are you going to do it?
The private sector. We have to, but you can't do it overnight. It has to be a gradual change. And that's something that I would want to work with this committee on, because I think we can't do it in a haphazard way and we can't do it in an ideological way. But we have to make sure that we preserve the dream for the American people. That's the key.
I would love to work with you on it. I think that if you take a look at how long 30 years is, 30 years is quite a while. And I think private lot can change in 30 years. And I think, truthfully, I don't see how it can happen. I know Canada doesn't have it. And I don't want to be like Canada.
No. I mean, they're okay. They're good people.
Yeah, they're good people. They are. I can almost see Canada from my doorstep, so they are good people. But I can tell you that it's going to be difficult. But I'm willing to listen to ideas and try to move forward. We talked about reducing red tape. There's an outfit called the Interagency Council on Homelessness, which works for ways to address homelessness in different geographies. One size doesn't fit all.
Right.
Will you commit to working with those folks to make sure that can happen?
That's very important. You know, I've been that close to being homeless myself, so I can really understand that.
Super. Not a lot of folks have talked about Indian country. My friend Senator Heidkamp may when I get done, but housing is a huge problem, and it's one of the reasons that we hope you come to North Dakota and Montana when you do your listening session to look at some of the large land-based tribes and the challenges that they have. But one of the biggest sources for federal funding in Indian housing is block grants. And do you have any ideas on how HUD can really focus on Indian country because you're right, there's a lot of regulation, but there's also just unbelievable, you've come from it, you've seen it, poverty. Yes. And if you want to talk about at-risk kids, they're all Native American in the state of Montana for the most part. So do you have any ideas on how we can improve housing, because it's a critically important piece of that holistic puzzle you talk about?
Right. Well, again, going back to the holistic model, you know, it's not just a matter of putting people in a house, it's understanding what's going on those tribal lands. Why is there such a drug problem, for instance? What is facilitating that? Can we start further down the road and see if there's a way that we can stop some of the drug trafficking, and then at the same time simultaneously work on the housing? As I mentioned before, getting rid of the regulatory burden for creating housing on the reservations. I mean, it's absolutely absurd. And working, I think, with some of the tribal leaders themselves, rather than imposing things upon them. I think that all of those things will have an ameliorating effect.
Thank you for your service, Dr. Carson.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Senator Perdue.
Dr. Carson, thank you for your lifetime of service and your willingness to serve again. Please don't take any disrespect for my absence here in the better part of this meeting. I have an Armed Service Committee going at the same time with General Mattis. It strikes me, I'm incredibly impressed with the nominations of this president-elect, and you're not the least of those by any means. I have always admired your heart for humanity, and in our meeting earlier this week, I could see that. One of my first jobs, Doctor, was in a Head Start program, and I learned early when I put people around me to judge their hearts, and I think President-elect Trump did a great job in your nomination for this.
Thank you.
I'm amazed with your quotes here. We don't need to help people achieve a position where we feel good about. Rather, we need to put people in a situation that they feel good about. Would you elaborate on that, please?
Yeah, well, you know, in many cases, you know, over the years, bureaucrats, politicians, no offense, have just, you know, done things that make themselves feel good and pat themselves on the back, and we took care of this problem, when in fact, you go and you look at the people and, you know, they're living in squalor and dilapidated places, and there's danger, and you go outside, you're worried about whether your kid's going to come back safe. You know, so, you know, we need to be looking at the end product rather than, you know, the beginning of the process. That's what I'm talking about.
You had mentioned public-private partnerships. In USAID, I've served on the Foreign Relations Committee, and one of the great successes is Power Africa, where we put $8 billion up of U.S. taxpayer money, and we attracted over $40 billion of private money to power a significant portion of Africa over the next decade. Talk to us a little bit about your vision, about how you can get the private sector involved with government to help heal our cities and develop. You had mentioned the other thing, too, housing and urban development. In our private conversation, you spent more time talking with me about development, and I'd like you to elaborate on that as it relates to the private investment.
Sure. Well, you know, we've got a lot of very talented people in this country in the private sector. And, you know, the low-income housing tax credit is an excellent example. You know, it's seen over by the Congressional Finance Committee. But, you know, that has allowed an enormous number of places to be renovated. And there's plenty more where that comes from. In Detroit, I was talking to a private developer recently about some of the work they were doing with blight. And, you know, it was costing $16,500 per building. They came in and working with recycling organization were able to take the buildings down for $5,500. That was a way of using the private sector in a very positive way to clear large amounts of the city. Those are the kinds of things that we need to look for. There's a lot of money in the private sector. There's a lot of goodwill in the private sector. And I want to work on those programs, and I want to study those programs that are working so that we can multiply them across the country.
Well, thank you again for your answers, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, and God bless you for your willingness to do this.
Thank you.
Senator Heitkamp.
Mr. Chairman, welcome to that chair. We look forward to working with you. You have a brave new crowd. Two little kids' chairs. I used to sit over in that one, so welcome to the new members.
I sat in that one over there.
It's the little kids' chairs, sorry. Dr. Carson, you know, there's a lot of people who kind of scratched their head when you were nominated, thinking, what does he know about housing? And how is he going to manage this agency? And I've thought a lot about that, and you and I have had a great conversation, and thanks for coming. But we aren't in the housing business. We're really in the people business as we look at this agency. And I grew up completely different than you. I grew up in a town of 90 people. My dad basically was a seasonal construction worker. My mom was a school cook. And like you, I was blessed with parents who really believed in me. Unfortunately, in America, there's so many children who don't have our blessing. And those children have suffered traumatic events in their life. It has limited their ability to grow emotionally. It's limited their resiliency. It's created problems for them that they carry with them the rest of their life. And I thought about you as a neurosurgeon. I thought of you as a man who understands brain function. I thought, you know, you just might be the right guy if you focus on why people are in poverty, not judging people who are in poverty, but doing it in a way that we haven't thought about before, that we haven't even considered before. And so I would really challenge you to take your enthusiasm for change, which we all agree that we are an exceptional country that should provide opportunity, should provide that ability that you and I both have had to come out of poverty, but we absolutely need to understand why people are in poverty without judgment. And that's a critical piece for me. You and I have had a great chance to talk about Native American issues. We had a great chance to talk about rural housing shortage, both of which Senator Tester raised. I want to just hit two issues. One is transitional housing, and the other one is runaway and homeless youth. And they are on the other end of the spectrum of what I'm talking about in terms of early intervention. But they are critical services for what we hope to do as a country when we look at judicial reform, when we look at the opportunity to change. Transitional housing is something that I believe is essential to reentry for so many of the people whose human capital we're wasting every day. And I want a commitment from you that you will make transitional housing, as we look at judicial reform, a major priority in terms of housing and in terms of helping in that cycle.
Well, I think it's very important. As you know, we have the HEARTH program, the homeless emergency.
But I'm not really talking about that. I'm talking about long-term, transition, so that when people are taken out of situations, whether it is disability, whether it's a homeless vet, they're provided wraparound services in a location where they feel and are nurtured and have the ability to transition. And so we think, okay, you get 30 days and you're out. I mean, we have an opioid crisis in this country. We have a homeless crisis in this country. We have a trauma crisis in this country. It can't be dealt with without dealing with transitioning people out of those situations.
Well, you relayed a very poignant story during our conversation, which stuck with me, which I've used to others. It's obviously very important, and I very much look forward to working with you. It's an important issue.
I want to talk about another issue that we deal with a lot, and that's human trafficking, youth trafficking, the abuse of children. A lot of people think, I would like to say, it's like when talk about human trafficking or child sex trafficking, they sometimes kind of see this Laura Ingalls Wilder bounding through the prairie, and some dark cloud comes and swoops her up, and now she's in this horrible life. And I'm not saying that doesn't happen, but I will tell you who these children are. These children have been thrown away, they have been given away, and they're abused every day. And if we don't get them off the street, if we don't do everything that we can to protect them at that point when they're leaving their family, they will be the most serious victims of crime in this country. And so we need to reauthorize the homeless and runaway youth program. We need to do everything that we can to provide that environment, that shelter environment that prevents these children from becoming victims of the most heinous and horrific crime that's committed in this country.
Senator, you don't have to convince me about.
You got to get it in, though. Lay down the marker. And so I look forward to working with you, and I really look forward to you examining the work that we've been doing on trauma and really seeing that as an entry-level opportunity for change in the early stages, especially in the programs that you run, because housing is foundational. It's foundational to family growth. It's foundational to raising healthy Americans. So,
thank you. This is going to be a great committee to work with.
Yeah. We are a really great committee. You're right.
That's stipulated. Senator Cotton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Brown, Dr. Carson, I want to apologize for my delayed arrival. We've had the nominations for General Mattis in the Armed Services Committee and Congressman Pompeo in the Intelligence Committee. Just two other nominees like yourself that reflect very well on Donald Trump's cabinet and his judgment in assembling that cabinet. And I look forward to supporting both of them as well as your nomination, Dr. Carson. We spoke in our private meeting about a topic you've already discussed with Senator Heller and Senator Donnelly that is close to my heart, and that's the problem of homeless veterans. Right. I think there's something like 40,000 homeless veterans in America today. In Arkansas, we have several hundred of those veterans. I think it's appalling failure of our government and our society that we have veterans who are willing to risk their lives for our country, and they currently live in worse conditions than they did in the deserts of Iraq or the mountains of Afghanistan. I just wanted to give you an opportunity to lay in a little bit about how you think about this problem and what we can do better to solve this very disturbing problem of homelessness among our veteran population.
Well, thank you, and thank you for your service in the military to our country. You know, back in World War II, one of the things that helped us to get where we needed to get in the civil rights movement was the service of Black Americans in the military. And when people began to see how they were willing to sacrifice everything but would come home to our own country and be ill-treated, it sparked something in the American psyche. And I'm hopeful that at this stage of the game, the fact that we have homeless veterans and veterans who are not receiving appropriate medical care will have the same effect. It seems almost immoral that we could have a group of people who've sacrificed so much and then basically just kick them in the pants. That certainly will not be the case with HUD.
Well, thank you very much, and I look forward to working with you on this question, as I know so many members of this committee and the Congress does, and I know that you'll be working closely with Mr. Shulkin, pending his confirmation as the Secretary of the VA. I just want to say thank you once again for your willingness to answer the call of service. I know sometimes leaving private life can be a challenge for individuals, but I'm very glad that the President-elect has selected you to be our Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, and I look forward to working together with you and seeing you from time to time in front of this committee.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Dr. Carson.
Thank you, Senator. We have one senator who may show up for his first round questions, but at this point there are no senators in the room who have not already had one round. I know there is some interest in a second round, and so could I get just by a show of hands, who's interested in a second round? So we have 2 or 3. At this point...
Do I get to vote?
Actually, we should ask you if you need a break, or you want to just go on and finish this. Let's go ahead and start the second round then, and I will probably at some point jump in with some questions, but I'll go to you first.
Sure. Thank you,
Senator
Mr.
Brown.
Chairman, and thank you for sitting here and your patience. And I noticed you weren't drinking that much water, so you didn't have to get up like Senator Crapo and like the chairman and I did. So
I'm thinking about that.
I know exactly
You let
your
us
age.
know.
I know exactly your age. I want a little more specific on the issue that Senator Warren raised. Yesterday, the President-elect announced his intention to hang on to his investments, not put them into a blind trust. I appreciated, too, Senator Tester's very specific admonition about that. This creates particular problems for HUD since he has invested. We don't know his tax return, so there may be others. We know he's invested in at least one subsidized housing project, Starrett City. I wondered if you're aware of his stake there, and have you discussed Starrett City with the President?
I've not discussed it with him. I do know about it.
Okay. I don't see how HUD can avoid the appearance of a conflict should any issue arise on this property. Do you?
Well, what I would hope would happen with this committee is that we could come up with a suggestion that might be acceptable to all sides.
Okay, let me start with one. Would you commit to report back to the committee on any issue that should arise on a property, Starrett or otherwise? Again, we don't necessarily know if there are others. Would you commit to report back on any issue that should arise on a property owned by Mr. Trump or his family, in any contact you or any subordinates receive from the Trump Organization or the White House or any other source other than the normal back and forth between a project and its oversight officials? Would you commit to reporting to this committee anytime that arises?
I would be more than delighted to discuss those issues.
Will you then, thank you, will you set up a process to identify those conflicts?
I'll work with you to set that up.
Okay, good. Thank you for that commitment. One other question in response, then I won't take my whole 5 minutes, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate your comments and your testimony about the interaction between housing and health care. When Matthew Desmond signed his book to me, and I bought it, I want you to know that, he wrote on his book, Evicted, home equals life. And that, in a nutshell, says what you were saying between the connection between housing, health care, and so much else. And
right.
As I think Senator Van Hollen said, if you don't have a home, so many other things go wrong, obviously. So even if you are widely successful in promoting healthier housing, will it be any more than a drop in the bucket compared to the loss of health insurance for as many as 30 million Americans, including nearly 1 million in my state? Governor Kasich, a Republican, has admonished Republicans here, don't repeal the Affordable Care Act unless you replace it immediately, because what do I do with 700,000 people that have Medicaid now in Ohio? His words. So my question is, you responded to him that if you're going to, that you are seem less than enthusiastic about the way Medicare and Medicaid operate. So you said you would be willing to eliminate them, but only if something replaced them immediately. So does that mean that you would oppose the elimination of the Affordable Care Act without something replacing it immediately?
Yeah, I've said that many times. I don't think it's reasonable to pull the rug out from anybody. We always have to make sure that we are taking care of our citizens,
So if you had,
regardless of our political persuasion.
so if you had been the senator from Florida instead of Senator Rubio, the vote last night might have been different. Oh, never mind. Okay. Thank you, Dr. Carson.
Thank you. Although we had a senator.
One more point. I just wanted to thank you. I'm sorry. I just wanted to say thank you.
You remind me of Columbo.
Well, I'm not good or bad. I've actually heard that. No, I'm Rose. It's all right. I've heard that before. I think I heard it from somebody in Youngstown. Just one point. I wanted to thank you for what you're saying about lead, repeated comments about lead, both in public housing and in the private rental market. That is so important. The discussion we had about the percentage of toxic lead in almost every single home built before about 1978. Yeah, but even the housing stock that's older, right, it's particularly bad.
Exactly.
Because the housing is decaying. And in the city I live in, it's probably 85 to 90% of the homes. So thank you, and I apologize, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
All right, we did have a senator on the Republican side who wanted to get here, but is held up at the Armed Services Committee hearing that's going on right now. And Senator Warren, who was here, has been called back to the Armed Services Committee. She indicated that if necessary, she could submit her further questions for the record. And so at this point, we do not have any further questioning for you, Dr. Carson, and we will wrap up the hearing. I will say that to all senators and Dr. Carson, we have a practice of submitting questions following the hearing for the record. Oh, did you have a question? Okay, Senator Cortez Masto, I didn't realize you wanted another round.
I appreciate that, and I will be brief because you've done an incredible job, and I appreciate the comments and the holistic approach that you have to helping individuals. Dr. Carson, there is one thing of interest to me, however, that you've talked about, which is public-private partnerships and the financing when it comes to public-private partnerships. I haven't really had a conversation with you and what your thoughts on how that would be addressed when it comes to housing and mortgages.
When I talk about public-private partnerships, I'm talking about having people in the private sector actually invest their own resources in either building or renovating or refurbishing housing that is then used by HUD to house people. So they have to obviously be incentivized in order to do that. But the big stumbling block is the initial capital to be able to get it done. And as long as they can realize a return on that capital investment, you know, this country was built on entrepreneurial risk-taking. So that's always going to be a part of who we are, and that's what I want to capitalize upon.
So in other words, are you envisioning a role for private equity capital to invest in the future housing growth and mortgages and housing for individuals and homeownership?
I will be engaging in a number of conversations with the FHA administrator, with this committee, and with finance experts at HUD to figure out the best ways so that we can always have a win-win situation.
So what you're saying does concern me because of the fact that Nevada was a foreclosure crisis, ground zero for the foreclosure crisis. And a lot of that was money that we saw come in from Wall Street, big investments coming in for these mortgages, and individuals really at the end of the day lost their homes.
But I think
because there was an investment from Wall Street. So I'm just curious. That's why if you could elaborate your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think you're talking about, you know, predatory people who came in and took advantage of people.
It was a combination. The big banks were involved as well with some of their teaser rates, but there was Wall Street was involved. So that's why. And you know what? We can follow up on this individually. I just want to put that in your ear. That is a concern of mine and something I will be looking out.
I would look forward to working with you on that because I don't want those predators swooping in either.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
All right.
All right, thank you. With that, the questioning is concluded. And to all of the senators, we ask that you get your questions for the record in by close of business on Tuesday. Next Tuesday, close of business next Tuesday. And Dr. Carson, we ask that you promptly respond to those so that we can move forward as promptly as we can.
I will be happy to do that. And I want to thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Vice Chairman, and all of the committee members, both present and absent, for what was actually kind of fun. Thank you.
It's always better to be at this end of this kind of a hearing rather than the beginning when you're sitting in that chair.
All right.
Dr. Carson, thank you also for coming here and being well prepared. This hearing is now adjourned.
Okay, so we're not,